Welcome to part 404 of tutorial 1. In this tutorial, we will be going over a coding problem. So we will write a program that prints out a graph for the sine x function for values from x from 0 to 2 pi in increments of 0.2. Let's quickly review the sine function. The sine function has a range between 1 and -1. All the outputs it will produce are at maximum 1 and minimum -1. The sine function looks like this little curvy thing. And the sine function extends from the point 0 to 2 pi. We don't have to worry about inclusivity or exclusivity at the moment because we're in computer science. It will be centered around the pi. It'll be mirrored when it crosses the pi value, which is its halfway point. So let's go over how we're going to solve this question. Whenever we solve a question, we first want to pseudocode it, to write some comments, just figure out what we're going to do, and then that's going to drive our code. So first I see that we're going to be printing a star on every line. So I know that somehow I need to just print out multiple lines. Well, I know I can use a for loop for that. So I'm going to have a for loop iterating over in increments of 0.2 for some value. And it's going to go from 0 to 2 pi. This we can understand from our question here. So we already know that our for loop is going to look something like for int x, our input for the sine function, equals 0. We get it from here. X is less than 2 pi. X plus equals 0.2, our increment here. Okay, well, we have our for loop down. Let's think what's going to happen within this for loop. Well, we're going to have to write out these stars. So somewhere in our for loop, we're going to have the print statement for a star. What else do we know? We know that, well, there's going to be some spacing here. We can easily represent this by just the space character. I'll know that with this little symbol here, which is called a cup. So we know we'll be printing some spaces, but we don't know how many spaces, as it will vary from place to place. We see here that we'll have a certain number of spaces, but here we'll have even more, and here we'll have even less. So how are we going to print out this variable number of spaces? Well, we can use a for loop to print out this variable number of spaces. I'll fill that out later, just knowing that's going to be my tool. So let me think what my code's going to do at this point. This is going to give me every single line. This line is going to give me every single line. I'm going to print out some spaces. I'm going to print out my star. And then I'm going to print out a new line character so I can get to the next line. This can be represented by the \n. So that's almost everything that we need to do. We just need to know how our spacing is going to work. Let's go over to our code and figure that out there. Right now I'm in my development environment. I know that based on the pseudocode I wrote earlier, I'm going to be writing out some code here. So let me just copy over the things I wrote in my pseudocode. So my first for loop is going to be iterating over each line. And I will have another for loop. This will be the work inside the line, iterating over each space. Then I'm going to have my print statement. Well, this I can just write out really quickly. And I'm also going to print out a new line character. I can combine these both into one statement. That's convenient. Well, if I'm using printf, I know I need to now include standard io.h, stdio for standard, io for input output.h, header file, which we will learn about later. This is going to be our main function. So let's copy our comments over into here. Okay, how are we going to iterate over each line? Well, we wrote out the skeleton for this code earlier. For int line equals 0, x equals 0, my bad. X is less than 2 pi. Wait, how do we write pi? Well, if we look online, we can find out that the math library, math.h, actually includes the pi function in there. And to use it, all we have to do is write m_pi in all caps, and that's our value of pi. We're going to be doing 2 pi, so that's going to be 2 times m_pi. And we know we're going to be incrementing over in increments of 0.2. Now, I have a bug in my code right now that I'm hoping that you guys can see right now. Do you see what the bug is? I defaulted to writing int for this variable. But think what happens when we use an integer. The first variable is going to be 0. The first value of x is going to be 0. And then, well, it's going to increment. It's going to increment by 0.2. What's 0 plus 0.2? Well, that's equal to 0.2. How is this going to be stored as an integer then? When we tell the computer that x equals 0.2, integer x equals 0.2, the computer says, okay, you're promising me you don't care about the decimals at all, because that's what an integer is, and I'm trusting that you know what an integer is. Well, the computer's going to trust us. That's 0.2. The 0.2, the decimal part of this number, is not necessary whatsoever. So it's just going to take the value of 0 and add that into our thing. Okay? So it's just going to take the value of 0 and add it into our thing. Well, and then we can see that once we do this over multiple times, well, it's just going to keep hitting 0. So using an integer is the incorrect thing to use here. What can we use instead? We can use something that accepts decimals. That would be either a float or a double. Let's just stick with a float for now. And let's move on in our code. The next thing we know we're going to be doing is this print statement should be here, sorry. We're going to be iterating over each space. Oh. Ooh, I am being a mess right now. We're going to be iterating over each space. So how do we do that? Well, we first need to know how many spaces we should start off with. This you can define on your own, and I'm just going to use the number 25. Okay, so now we know where we're starting off with the first star. How many spaces do we add to it? Well, the amount of spaces we'll be adding is dependent upon the sine value. So we need to think, how do we get the sine value? We're going to need sine of x. The function sine of x. Conveniently, sine was included with the math library that we included up here. So we actually don't need to do any more work in that regard. Okay. Well, now we need to look at what the sine variable does. If we look up C, sine in programming, we can see the function prototype of sine. This is the declaration. It's double sine double x. This is going to give us a double. And so we'll create our double. We'll call this the sine value and assign it to sine x. Think about what would happen if we used an int. We're going to see the same problem we had before. Remember before when we had 0 plus 0.2 equals 0? The same thing will happen here. We're going to have our output of this sine x. It'll be a decimal, 0 point something. And then this is going to get truncated into the sine value. Our sine value is a type integer. So the computer's going to say, okay, just ignore the decimals. We don't care about it at all. And it'll give us 0. When that happens, we're going to have a very flat looking output. So we shouldn't be doing that. I realize there's a typo here at this point. I'm sorry if I did not include that. So that is our... So now how do we iterate over each space? Well, we can create a for loop for int, I'll say I. How do we iterate over each space? Well, we can do that in a for loop. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be printing out spaces up until I get to my spacing value. And I want to add my sine value to my spacing value. Okay, let's start off by doing that. For, in this case, we're going to need a temporary integer. I is nearly like the industry standard. I is less than spacing plus the sine value. Oops, that's not a plus. Plus sine value. I plus plus. And then in this for loop, we're just going to print out the space character. This is our code so far. Let's test out to see how it works. To test out to see how it works, I'm going to compile it. And this file, as you can see, is called sine printer. Oh, well, we have an error here. Let's see. Temp something.o in function main, sine printer, undefined reference to sine, collect 2 error LD, return 1 exit status. I have no clue what this means. What do we do once we get a compiler error? Well, we're going to look it up online. So open up Google, or Bing if you use that, Baidu, Amazon Go, whatever. Amazon Go, what? I mean DuckDuckGo. We're just going to throw this into, oh, that is not the right thing to paste in there. Copy, paste. Oh, well, you look at that, Stack Overflow has an answer. Let's look at what the Stack Overflow says. Okay, we can see here that someone has the same question. And let's glance over the answer. As Paul has already mentioned, add -lm to link the math library in the step where you are attempting to generate your executable. Okay, well, GCC is what generates our executable. So it seems like it's not adding in the math library. That's weird. Well, let's try their solution. GCC sineprinter.c -lm. And it compiles all of a sudden. That is weird. Let's look at why this is. Okay, well, glancing over the rest of this, it looks like at some point they removed the math library from what was automatically compiled. So now we have to use -lm whenever we want to compile. Let's move on to the rest of this. Let's test out the code. /a.out. This is a funny looking graph. Let's think why this is looking so funny. Well, we have a bug in our code that might not be easily visible at first. And that's we are adding our spacing and sign values, but we are adding them in a very unoptimal way. Because what's happening is that our sign value is going to be a value between -1 and 1. When that's added to 25, the most it's going to change it is between 24 and 26. Well, that is not a lot of change, and as we can see here, it's not any change at all. So what can we do is fix this? Well, we can amplify our sign value. For this example, I'm just going to multiply sign value times 10. I'm going to use times equals for this. And let's try this out. That didn't work. Oh, I forgot to compile again. So I need to recompile, and I can try it out again. And look at that. My output looks very, very similar to what I was looking for. So I've sufficiently solved this question. I've written a program that prints out a graph for the sin x function for values of x from 0 to 2 pi in increments of 0.2. Let's go over a harder version of this question. I have the harder version open on my left here. We'll have a vertical line for the 0. Okay, let's see what this looks like. Okay, well, looking at it now, it looks like we're going to have to throw in this extra line. How are we going to do that? Well, let's keep working on this file. I see that my spacing is going to need this 0 line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, if I'm at the 0 line, which is 25 spaces in, I'm just going to print out a vertical line. Let's get that out of the way first. I'll be printing out this vertical line instead of a space. We can see that in the top half of this example. So I'll say if my I is equal to 25, I'll print out this. Let's put in some brackets to make this look nice. Else, I'll print out the other thing. I'll print out a space otherwise. Okay, let's test out this change. Let's format this a bit and run this change. Oh, I forgot to compile again. Hey, well, you look at that. My top half of the graph is looking spectacular. Okay, well, I don't have anything for the bottom half. Why is that? Oh, it's because once I print out this star, I'm not printing any more spaces. I'm not printing out the line after that. It's because the value of these stars is less than 25. Okay, so, well, we should check that. If I printed less than 25, how would I do that? Let's see. I would say if my spacing plus my sign value is less than 25, let's put this all in the clause, then what should I do? Well, I should run another for loop. For int I equals 0. In fact, I'll just take all the code from here. Actually, I can take all this code. Just copy and paste it right over. Okay. So now wait a second. Where do we start with this? Starting from I equals 0, let's see what will happen. Well, starting from I equals 0 isn't really going to work. So as you'll see, the same problem that stopped us from printing out a line over here is going to be pertinent over here. Well, we should start from sign value plus spacing. Okay, so now that we have that, let's figure out how we can edit our conditional to meet this new criteria of we need to at least get to 25. Well, let's just say it's less than 25. That seems like it'll work. Let's recompile this and run it. And oh, we'll see that this isn't working as planned at all. Let's think what's happening here. Well, I can actually see right now that I actually have a bug in my code. Remember how I was lazy earlier and just wrote my \n here because it was convenient? Well, that means I'm creating a new line before I'm printing out all these spaces. Okay, so let's first remove this. We'll move our \n until after we print out all these spaces. Need a semicolon here. You'll notice that this doesn't change the code at all as to what we intended, because this will only run if we need spaces afterwards. So the first half of our graph will still look the same. Okay, let's run this again. Hey, we have restored our graph to what it should be, but we'll notice that it's still not printing out the line. Okay, well, let's think how we can print this out. Let's trace our code here because this is pertinent to printing out that vertical line and see what's happening. Well, once I get to my loop only goes less than the value of 25. That means I'll never actually hit the value of 25 when I go into my loop. Okay, that's a very simple fix then. That's why it's not printing out the line, I think. So let's make that less than or equal to. And we'll run this again. Okay, we're getting really close now. We can see this line is just a little bit off. And now we just need to think, why is this line off? Well, let's take this line into our text editor and just look at it a little bit closer. You'll see that this vertical line occurs, then a space, then a star. Okay, well that means our spacing is not working correctly. How can we fix this? Well, we're getting offset by a little bit. Why is that? Oh, it's because we're printing out a star character here. Remember, stars and spaces are both one character wide. So in order to compensate for that star, we'll put in a +1 there. Oh, I forgot to recompile. Hey, that's actually even better. We've lost that extra space. But now we still need to go down by 1. This is still printing out too many. How can we do that? Well, an easy fix would be, let's just decrease when we print out this. We can decrease it by just making this value 24 instead of 25. Similarly, I'm just going to compensate for that in the for loop, just to make sure it doesn't go wacky. And there you go. We have completed we've completed the harder version of this question. What we had to do was think about, okay, once we have the original graph, which was just the stars, how do we get the vertical line in? Well, for the first half, it was easy. But for the second half, we needed to add in a whole extra block of code, nearly doubling the size of our code, because we needed to throw in that vertical line from the second half that wasn't being printed out. We also needed to pay attention to the star being printed out, and how that offset us, and how this character itself is offsetting us. That's why we had to decrement this down from 25 to 24. So that concludes this little tutorial on how to complete the Sine question. Thank you for watching.